Number 1. Charles Morgan. On the morning of March 22, 1977, 43-year-old Charles Morgan left to go to work. He ran an escrow company in Tucson, Arizona. He didn't come home that night, but he wasn't reported missing. In fact, he didn't come home for 3 days. Around 2 o'clock on the morning of March 25th, his wife found him at the back door of their home. His wrists were bound with zip ties. He was missing a shoe and there was a plastic zip tie around one of his ankles. His wife got him inside and he indicated he couldn't talk. She got a pad of paper and a pen and he explained what happened. He wrote that he had been kidnapped. He also wrote that his throat had been sprayed with a hallucinogenic drug that could make him go crazy or kill him if he talked. Obviously, his wife wanted to go to the police and take him to the hospital, but he refused. Instead, he stayed home and rested until he could use his voice again. While he was resting, he told his wife that he secretly worked for the Treasury Department. He wrote that he was an agent and he was helping combat organized crime. At the time, because of the property laws in Arizona, the state had become a haven for organized crime syndicates to launder money. After the kidnapping, Morgan obviously became paranoid. He wore a bulletproof vest everywhere he went, and his belt buckle contained a hidden knife. He also started carrying a .357 Magnum revolver, and he kept several firearms in his car. He was also sure to drive his daughters to and from school. Then almost 3 months later, on June 8th, Morgan went missing again. 9 days after he went missing, his wife received a strange phone call. It was a woman who didn't identify herself. She called his wife by her name and said that Charles was fine, and then said Ecclesiastes 12, 1-8. She then hung up the phone. Morgan's wife looked up the passage. The modern English version of the passage reads, "Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the difficult days come and the years arrive when you say, 'I have no pleasure in them.' Before the sun, light, moon, and stars are darkened, and the clouds leave after the rain. In the day when those watching the house tremble, and the strong men are bent over. When the grinders cease because they are few, and those looking through the windows have dimmed eyes. And the doors on the street are shut, and the sound of grinding is low. And one rises up at the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of song are brought low. When they are afraid of heights, even the terrors along the road. The almond tree blossoms, and the grasshopper drags itself along, and desire fails. Because man goes to his eternal home, and mourners go about the streets. Remember your Creator before the cord of silver is snapped, or the bowl of gold is smashed, or the jar by the spring broken, or the wheel at the cistern crushed. The dust returns to the earth where it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. It is all vanity, says the preacher. All is vanity." 2 days after the call, and 11 days after Morgan went missing, his body was found near Sells, Arizona. He had been shot once in the head, and the sheriff's department ruled the death a suicide. Morgan's family, friends, members of the media, and some other investigators don't think his death was a suicide. It's important to point out that only the sheriff's department labeled the death a suicide. The medical examiner, on the other hand, didn't say if it was a suicide or a homicide, and instead labeled it an unsolved death. The first notable problem with the suicide theory is the way that Morgan was shot. Morgan was killed with his own gun, and it was found beside him. He was shot at the back of the head, near the top of the head. There was gunshot residue on his left hand, so the sheriff's department concluded that was the hand he used to shoot himself. The problem is that Morgan was right-handed. Why would he use his non-dominant hand to shoot himself in the back of the head? Another problem is that there were no fingerprints, not even Morgan's, found on the gun. For the 10 days he was missing, Morgan was hiding out in motel rooms. He died within 12 hours of being found. He was still wearing his bulletproof vest. Why would Morgan hide out for 11 days, drive out to the desert, and shoot himself in the back of the head with his non-dominant hand while wearing a bulletproof vest? There were also several oddities about the murder scene. The first is that, near the body, Morgan's tooth was found wrapped in a handkerchief. The second oddity and possible clue was found clipped to his underwear. It was an American $2 bill. On the back of the bill is an engraving of John Turnbull's painting, The Declaration of Independence. The television program, Unsolved Mysteries, said that the signers were numbered 1 to 7, however, it only appears that they are numbered 1 to 6. Also on the back of the $2 bill is a hand-drawn map of an area of Arizona. The map leads to Robles Junction and Sassabee, which are both towns in Arizona that were known routes for smuggling. Written on the front of the bill was 7 Spanish names. The initials of each name were A through G. Also written on the front of the bill was Ecclesiastes 12, and then arrows near the serial number indicating 1 through 8. Ecclesiastes 12, 1 through 8 is the same Bible passage the caller told Morgan's wife. What could a map of an area of Arizona, 6 founding fathers, 7 Spanish names, and a Bible verse written on a $2 bill possibly mean? Some investigators think that the bill was a code about who murdered him. It's possible that the message could have been meant for the Treasury Department or the FBI. They may have had a document or a file that corresponded with the written clues. If someone did decipher the code, that information has never been made public. 2 days after Morgan's body was found, the Sheriff's Department received an unusual phone call. It was a woman who only identified herself as Green Eyes. Green Eyes said that she visited Morgan in his motel room. He showed her a briefcase full of money. He said that it was $60,000 and he was trying to collect enough money to stop a contract hit on his life. The woman also admitted that she was the one who called Morgan's wife. She then hung up the phone. Unfortunately, Green Eyes has never been identified. When investigative reporter Don Devereaux looked into Morgan's financial dealings, he found out that he had done deals with at least 1, possibly 2, organized crime syndicates. One of Morgan's associates said that he kept a secret file on one of the syndicates. Morgan said it was his form of insurance. The secret file could be the reason that Morgan was kidnapped in March. He was kidnapped by the syndicate, and he was interrogated about the location of the file. After the kidnapping, Morgan found out that there was a contract on his life, and he collected enough money to try and buy off the hitman. He then drove out to the desert with the money to meet his killer. The hitman shot him and took the money. Backing up this theory is that shortly after the death, 2 men paid a visit to Morgan's widow. They flashed badges at her, and they said that they were with the FBI. They tore apart the house looking for something, but left without finding it. Don Devereaux made a Freedom of Information Act request for the FBI's file on Morgan. The FBI said that they had never heard of Morgan, and they didn't have any information on him. Despite a lot of circumstantial evidence, the Sheriff's Department still considers Charles Morgan's death a suicide. But the case may not end there. Morgan's bizarre death was featured on an episode of Unsolved Mysteries that aired on February 7th, 1990. One of the people that they interviewed was Don Devereaux. 4 months after the episode aired, on March 14, 1990, there was a shooting in Phoenix, Arizona. A man named Doug Johnson who worked at a computer graphic company, was found dead in his car outside of his work. Johnson had been shot in the back of the head, behind his left ear. The gun was probably fired a foot away from his head. The police originally thought that Johnson killed himself, but no gun was found at the site, and there was no gunshot residue on his hand. Johnson was right-handed, so if he did shoot himself, he probably would have shot himself behind the right ear, not the left. Devereaux thinks that Johnson was accidentally killed in a case of mistaken identity and that the bullet was meant for him. Johnson's office was across the road from his office. Johnson also drove a similar car to the one that Devereaux drove. No one has ever been arrested in connection with Johnson's death. Then in 1991, a year after Morgan's death, a freelance journalist working in Washington, D.C., named Daniel Casolaro, got in contact with Devereaux. Casolaro said that he had information on what Morgan was working on before he died. Before Devereaux and Casolaro could meet, something tragic happened. In August 1991, Casolaro traveled to Martinsburg, West Virginia, to meet a source for a story he was working on. The story was a vast government conspiracy called the Octopus. There were several aspects of the theory, but there were two main parts. The first aspect revolves around a computer program called the Prosecutor's Management Information System, or its acronym, PROMIS. PROMIS was designed to track criminal cases across the world. Supposedly, the Justice Department had the code modified so that they could spy on any other country that they sold the program to. The second aspect of the octopus theory is that in the lead up to the 1980 presidential election, Ronald Reagan's campaign team paid Iran $40 million to delay the release of hostages at the U.S. Embassy during the Iran hostage crisis. The delay would reflect poorly on Jimmy Carter, who was seeking re-election, but it would help Reagan, who had taken a strong stance against Iran. Sure enough, 20 minutes after Reagan made his inaugural address on January 20th, 1981, the hostages from the embassy were released. Nothing in the octopus theory has ever been proved with any sort of tangible evidence. On August 10th, Casolaro was staying in a hotel in Martinsburg. One of the maids at the hotel found his body in the bathtub. His wrists had been slashed a dozen times with a razor blade. His death was also ruled a suicide. Casolaro's family doesn't believe he killed himself for several reasons. The first is that Casolaro was afraid of blood, so even if he had taken his own life, he would have picked a less gory way to do it. Secondly, his brother said that 3 months before he died, Casolaro received death threats. Casolaro also told him that if he were to die in an accident, not to believe it, because he had been murdered. Finally, Casolaro's notes on the octopus disappeared around the same time that he died. The notes, which he accumulated over a year, have never been found. Despite the odd circumstances surrounding the deaths of all three men, their deaths are not considered homicides, and their cases are considered closed. Thanks a lot for watching today's video. Hopefully you found it interesting. If you did, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe. We post a new video every Thursday and Sunday. If you already do subscribe, thank you so much for doing so. You can also like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. We may even follow you back. But that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.